We are reading Journal 12, Crabbe by William Bell. I've been going to school all my life, like most people, but I learned more from Mary in all than in all those years put together. Useful things too, not the accusative case or parabolas or 1867 or metaphors. Growing up in the city had a very idealistic attitude toward old Ma nature, like the wilderness is a beautiful, peaceful place populated with cute little birds and noble animals. Well, that's bunk. So is the opposite notion that nature is a monster mother full of traps and vicious violence. The truth is that nature is just there. All those cute little beings survive by eating other beings. On the other hand, you don't need to think of the wilderness as a horrible threat waiting to gobble you up either. It's the way it is, and that's it. You can't change it by wishful thinking or complaining. And I grew up to like the fact that after a while, everything I learned from Mary was useful. When you live in the bush, everything you do is significant. It means something because if you don't know what you're doing and you're not careful, you get wet or drowned or hungry or lost. Sometime something will happen to you. That's a certainty. Nature isn't nasty. It is what it is, and you're part of it. You aren't in control like you are in the city. You work with the environment, not against it. Like a sailor, he doesn't fight the wind, he works with it, and he can't do that until he learns about it. In the city, nothing I did mattered. If I left my clothes lying around, nobody somebody picked them up. If I forgot my raincoat, I called a cab. I left my calculator on the subway once. I just bought a new one at the nearest store. But out there in the bush, as I said, everything mattered and I learned that fast. Sure, life meant a lot of hard work, but if things are important, you get a feeling of satisfaction when you do them well. A few days after our long walk, Mary and I were back in the bush setting some snares in an area she'd never tried before. I walked along behind her, watching her slim, lithe figure moving gracefully through the sun-shot hardwood bush. She walked in long, easy strides, her sand-colored hair swinging back and forth across her back. From time to time, she stopped, checked her compass, turned and looked in the direction from which we'd come, and moved on, her boots barely rustling the dry leaves on the forest floor. Presently, the land sloped, and we approached a copse of spruce and cedar, and the ground was wet in patches. We set snares for an hour or so. When the last one had been carefully arranged, Mary straightened up, wiped her hands on her pants legs, and looked at me, smiling. Her gray eyes looked mischievous. Okay, Crab, she said nonchalantly. Lead us home. Oh, yeah, right, sure. No, really, she said, all innocent. Take us back. Which way, leader? I haven't got a clue. Then she leaned against a windfall. What would you do if I weren't here? If we got separated? I answered, oh, I don't know. Let's see. First, I think I'd panic for a few minutes, then scream, then run around like a chicken with its head cut off, then call a cab. She laughed. Okay, come on. She and off she went, trailed by her faithful follower. That night, right after a supper of fish soup and bannock, we started compass school. And the next day, in a fine drizzle, Mary took me for a long walk in the greening woods, and we practiced taking bearings. It's pretty easy. The tricky part is taking the bearings and then staying on course over uneven ground and around obstacles like swamps, for instance. After a week, I could lead us into the bush and back with only a few corrections from Mary. I also learned a little about reading the terrain. Mary claims if you live somewhere long enough, you get familiar with the bush, and just like you get used to buildings and streets of a city. I was amazed to find that you can use a map and compass to find out where you are if you're lost. Where on the map, I mean. You use a process called triangulation, with some sharp eye work and a little arithmetic. We even did it by drawing a map in the dirt. Then one Sunday morning after breakfast, Mary announced it would in that out of the blue way of hers, I think today's the day. She looked up at the sky and made a big show of looking around the campsite. Yep, no rain tonight. No pressing work to do. It's a good day for it. Yeah, you're definitely right, I said. I was used to the way that Mary would say something with no connection to what you had been talking about, as if you'd been in her head all along listening to her thoughts. A great day for the big test, she continued. She stood and clapped her hands together. Come on, Crab. Exam time. Grab your bedroll, a knife, canteen, and some matches. Wrap up that lump of bannock. I'm not moving, I answered casually and poured myself some tea. I laid back on one elbow. You have clearly, clearly gone insane. Aren't you F. Period Crab's schoolboy wonder great scholar? Her eyes were wide in mock wonder. You got it, that's me. And you are a crazy goddess talking in riddles. Well, today you prove that compassing is one of your many accomplishments, so move your butt. Half an hour later, we were on the other side of the lake, standing on a tiny beach there. The sun still shone warmly, and the merest ripple could be seen on the lake. Turn around, Mary commanded. I don't know if you've ever been led blindfolded through the bush. Believe me, it's an experience. Mary led me for what seemed like an eternity and finally stopped. Sit, I sat. The blindfold came off, and after squinting against the light for a minute, I looked around. I was sitting on a large boulder in the middle of the bush. Of course, I recognized nothing. Suddenly, I felt very uneasy. It had just occurred to me that only I had brought a bedroll. Mary, I don't talk, Crab. Listen, take this. She handed me a piece of birch bark, now how pioneerish I thought, with writing on it, and her compass. Read that later. It has bearings and directions on it. Now follow the directions exactly, and I mean precisely, got it? Yeah, right, exactly. I wondered if she noticed the tension in my voice, and she paused dramatically to get my attention. If you come across water, you've screwed up. Stop and make a smoky fire and stay put. Repeat that. Knock off the drama, Mary. I heard you. She just looked at me until I repeated it all. But where am I going, Mary? Back to the beach? You didn't listen, dopey. If you get back to the beach, you've screwed up. But never mind. Do as I say and follow your first instruction. I read the bark. 60 degrees to Big Pine. Don't look back. That was it. Off I went, fighting the urge to look over my shoulder and say something to her. I lasted about 50 yards when I turned and she had disappeared. Mary had set up the trail so that I would have to spend the night in the bush, and I realized, after I'd spent most of the day following her directions, that I wasn't going to get off easy. I had some moments of doubt, too. She had said to me a million times, trust the compass, Crab, because many times I felt like I knew where I had to go, but the compass didn't agree. It was the same now, but I doggedly maintained my faith in the magic window with the needle on it. Basically, I made out all right. It was what else that was going on in my head that gave me trouble. On one level, I was very logical, following the directions and bearings as exactly as I could, making decisions about the landmarks. But below the calculations, like a dark, damp room in the basement under the computer banks, I was getting very uneasy. The further I went, the deeper I traveled into the bush alone. This was different from water travel. There, you move through open space. The sky is right there over you. You're in the comfort of the horizon, and you can see where you've come from and how far you've traveled. But the bush, waiting quietly on the shore of every lake, the bush is different. Even in spring, when the buds are beginning to unfurl, it swallows you down. The trees crowd you, and the sky is distant, held from you by millions and millions of strong branches. You walk and walk, growing more and more fatigued, sweating and irritated as you slip and stumble or get slashed across the eye by a whip-like branch of a sapling. Swamps and bogs, dark, wet, even more crowded, threaten you, and they cause time-consuming detours. And no matter how many hours you travel, you have almost no sense of progress, not until you reach terrain that you recognize, if you reach such terrain at all. I didn't. I didn't know where I was going or when I would get there, and there was always the chance that I wouldn't get there at all. So by the time the forest began to darken and I spread my bedroll on a bed of piled up leaves on a piece of flat ground in the lee of a rock outcrop, I was very tired and very uneasy. Fear isn't the right word, although fear was part of it. I don't know if you've ever felt totally isolated, but that's sort of what it was like. There was literally no one but me there, out in the middle of nowhere. As I lay rolled up in the old blankets, set tied in for the long wait for dawn, I thought a lot about loneliness. How I sometimes feel alone in a crowd of other kids in the school gym at the assembly. The beat called for some stupid reason like a pep rally, the American style for the football team. When I went through my day with no real friends. How our formal dinners at home were three people in solitary, condemned, it seemed, forever. How my life was stabilized by a mental picture I carried around in my head, a teenager alone in his room, staring at the TV screen, hating whatever program is on, sipping on vodka and waiting for sleep. How it was mostly my fault. Oh, I like to blame them all, but it was me. Nice way to spend the night in the bosom of Ma Nature, huh? I lay there all night trying to figure out the answer. Was my life very different from others? Were we all alone, in spite of the illusion of comfort from other people? Or was I only depressed in the dark, alien bush that wrapped me like a cloak? By the time the bush was filled with soft gray light, I was sitting up with my back to a big sugar maple. Naturally, I had no answer to those questions, and naturally, they seemed less urgent with the return of the dawn. Who does have an answer, though? All I know is that my loneliness was mostly my own fault. It was very hot in the late afternoon. My shirt was glued to me, grimy and bitchy. I sat down on a huge fallen oak that Mary had chosen for a landmark, the last landmark on a list of instructions she'd given me. I chewed hungrily on some bannock, took a pull on the canteen, and tried to ignore the few black flies that the heat had brought out. About time you got here. It was Mary's voice. My head snapped back and forth. I stood up and spun around. I couldn't see her. Where are you? I demanded, trying to keep the sound of relief from my voice. She stood up not 6 feet from me. She had been lying among a clutch of maple saplings. Right here, Crab. You all right? Yeah, I'm fine. Nice to see you. I missed you, I blurted out. Well, 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 she said half seriously. Do you know that's the first time you've admitted to a positive emotion since I met you? I smiled. Yeah, well, I feel pretty good today, I guess. And she turned and began to walk through the hardwood, she said, over her shoulder. Tell me. Tell you what? I walked along beside her, our feet rustling the dry leaves. Tell me how you feel, dummy. Oh, well, I don't know, sort of proud, I guess, like I did something good. You did do something good, Crab. That was a a tough route I worked out for you. I won't ask you if you were scared because I know you were. I would have been. By the way, you were safe all the time. I had you working back and forth on the big peninsula, so even if you went off course, you'd have hit the water and I could get you out. We came out of the bush right onto the little beach we were at yesterday. I'd ended up 100 yards from where I'd started. That didn't surprise me. So all the time, I said, a little disappointed, that I was sweating about going off course and wandering up to the bloody North Pole. It was a big, leafy playpen, safe as a baby. I wasn't mad, but my feeling of pride was gone. Yeah, you were safe, but you didn't know that, Crab. Don't miss the point. Your accomplishment was the same. You did it. Now the forest needn't be a terrible mystery to you. She handed me a paddle and we lifted the canoe into the water. You don't have to be blind anymore. And listen, Crab, if you've got a good reason to feel good about yourself, and you do, then do it. You don't need anybody's permission. Before we had paddled halfway across the lake, I felt good again. Living with her was like that.